Is America a democracy? No. Now, it's been said that America is like ancient Greece, which claimed to be a democracy. I will say that America is like ancient Greece, very much so, but not in a positive way. The concept of democracy was born or birthed in ancient Greece roughly around 507 BC. And the concept was one that suggested that it would be the rule of the people. The prefix demos means people. So therefore, when we have democracy or demokratia, as it was referred to in the Greek, that meant the rule of the people. But in reality, at its apex, the Athenian quote unquote democracy had roughly 100,000 people living in the city, but only a small percentage of white men had power, 10% to be exact. So out of a city of 100,000, only 10,000 actually had power. Only 10,000 had a voice in the government. So then that really means that Greece was not a democracy in the sense that we've been taught, in the sense that we think about it, but it was a type of democracy that was similar to the democracy that we set up in this country. Because when this country was set up, it was the rule of a few white men. So in that way, yes, America is very much like Greece. And then also, when Greece was set up, when its democracy was set up, its economy was driven largely by the labor of slaves. And in that way, yes, the United States was, at its inception, very much like Greece. Another way that America is like and was like ancient Greece is that former slaves in Greece were called metics. They were free in name only, but they could not vote. So they really weren't full citizens. In fact, they weren't citizens at all. They had no voice in the government. America is like that as well, because after the slaves were freed by the Emancipation Proclamation and then ultimately the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery in the United States, the southern states said, just because you're free, that doesn't mean you're citizens, and you have to be citizens to vote. And so we passed the 14th Amendment. And then the southern states said, just because you're citizens of the United States does not mean that you are citizens of our individual states. You have to be citizens of our individual states to vote. And so Congress proposed the 14th Amendment, which provided equal protection for those who were in a former condition of slavery, and thought that that would solve the problem for the former slaves, that would bring them into the whole of society, make them full participants in this quote unquote democracy. Southern states said, well, just because you have equal protection, that doesn't guarantee you the right to vote. We will put these additional conditions. In other words, you should see the picture. What the southern states kept doing, what this democracy kept doing to black people, was putting up barriers and impediments in front of them and in their path so that they could not be full participants. So even though we were technically citizens, we were very much like the ancient Greek democracy because we had the status of metics. And metics in ancient Greece were quote unquote free, but they had no voice in society. And we come all the way forward from the end of slavery, which is 1863, to 1965. We're still fighting this voting battle roughly 100 years later, and Congress passes the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And we know for sure at that point that the problem, the issue is solved, but it isn't solved. And the end result is this, that African Americans are still struggling to have a voice, to have a vote in this democracy. And in that way, this American democracy is very much like the democracy that existed in ancient Greece. Let's talk about two more ways that America is like ancient Greece. Ancient Greece, people came from other city-states, and in some instances, they came from other countries for opportunities, both in terms of economics and hopefully, if they could, in terms of being involved in the political process. But in ancient Greece, if you were an immigrant, you could not vote. You had no voice. The only reason that they allowed you to come in was to exploit your labor. Now, America's democracy is very much like that because we invite immigrants from South America and Central America and other places to exploit their labor. But then we do something very dubious. We demonize them for political reasons and make them out to be the others that need to be punished for doing the very thing that we've invited them to do, to come into this country and to help us build a better nation. In that way, this democracy is very much like the ancient. I have one more thing to tell you, one more point of comparison. In ancient Greece, women could not vote. The reason why women could not vote is that they were not citizens. That's right, women were not citizens in the ancient Greek democracy. In fact, if you look at and study this particular topic, you will see that they were thought of as oikos, and I'll spell the word O-I-K-O-S, which means property of the household. And they were under the kyrios, and I'll spell that word, K-Y-R-I-O-S, which means the man who was their master, the master of the house. So women had no right to act and to be and to exist. They had no individual personhood apart from their husband and their household, and their identity was tied to their household. And their rights were defined by a few white men. And in that way, in this very present hour in the United States, this democracy is like the ancient Greek democracy. You see, when we started out in this country, women did not have the right to vote. And the women essentially had no say over their personal bodies and their lives, and where they went and when they came or when they left. You see, women had no control, essentially, over their personal lives. Men, a few white men, had the majority emphasis and interest and control over their lives. And in this country, we see a similar pattern. And we thought at some point that we had improved upon the situation. But now we are trending back in the direction of where we started with respect to women's rights in this country. And we're becoming, once again, in a disturbing way, more and more like the ancient Greek democracy.